Matt and I made the decision to grow our family. It was shortly into my first trimester where we had the early prenatal genetic screening results come back that he had a 99% chance of being born with Down syndrome. Our biggest concern was knowing some of the medical problems that children with Down syndrome struggle with. Specifically, like at least half of children born with Down syndrome are born with some form of congenital heart disease.
Calum was born with two different defects, one a coarctation or a severe narrowing of the heart that is life-threatening. You can't survive without it, and he had surgery within the first week of life. He had a known atrioventricular septal defect. That's a defect where there's holes in the top part of the heart in addition to the bottom, and has abnormal formation of the normal mitral and tricuspid valves that would need surgery later in life.
We had met Dr. Jansen, who's a pediatric cardiologist. We'd met him prenatally and had conversations. He was the one who explained Calum's heart defects to us and gave us some idea of what to expect when he was born. Our pregnancy was pretty normal. It was highly monitored, lots of monitoring and things like that. And I had a great delivery. Everything went as good as could be expected. He came out and he cried, and he got to come to my chest right away. We got to have those really special initial bonding moments. He latched on and we got to breastfeed. Although it wasn't too long that we started to know that pink color was starting to fade. His hands and feet were getting kind of purplish in color. Through this time, the NICU staff was monitoring him because it was known that he would be slightly high risk. So they were on top of it, but we were starting to notice some of the signs as well. And the following day, the NICU team met and were communicating with the cardiologist in Omaha about when to do the echo and their concerns, and so they opted to do it a little bit sooner. They knew pretty quickly that narrowing in his aorta was a lot more severe than was planned, but we were scared and lots of tears, and they allowed our older children to come in to meet their brother because we didn't know if they would ever get to meet him if he didn't survive and that sort of thing. So all the grandparents got to meet Calum, and then they put a breathing tube in and put him in an isolette and put him on an airplane.
And so within the first 12 hours of his life, he went from being born to being on an airplane heading to Omaha. But to see your own child laying in bed with all the tubes and lines and everything, it's really hard to look back upon and see just how sick he was at that time. April 10th, 2024, he underwent his emergent life-saving surgery where Dr. Subramanian at Children's in Omaha, he opened Calum's chest. He took his aorta, which was 1 millimeter in size, and cut along the edge of it, and subsequently took a patch and made it so it was larger in size, 6 millimeters in size, which would be normal for a kid his age.
It's pretty shocking. He had tubes, or a breathing tube in still. He had lots of special lines, supporting his nutrition and hydration. He looked really sick, and we couldn't hold him. As a mom, that's, you just want to hold your baby, and, that wasn't possible.
Thank God the surgery was successful. He came back to the ICU. We knew things weren't going to be normal like it would be for another kid that didn't have his other problems with his other heart defect. He came back and he had oxygen saturations that were in the low 70s. Normal in anybody else would be above 90. We knew at this point that he was going to need something down the line to fix the other problem that we still see in front of us. After a few weeks of being in the hospital after his first surgery, he was luckily able to go home.
Calum did really, really well. They had prepared us initially that he might be in the hospital for 6 to 8 weeks after his first surgery, and he got to leave after, I think, 17 days. So we were very excited about that. And once we got back, we kind of settled into what became our new normal. We learned the life of having a medically complex child. He was hooked up to oxygen all the time, on monitors, getting his feeds through a tube in his nose. They couldn't do the initial big repair right away because that was one of our questions, like, can you do this now? Why do you need to have 2 surgeries? And Dr. Ram explained that the valves are like butterfly wings. They're very, very delicate, and so you want them to be a little bit stronger. So it was really our goal to just get him bigger and stronger to a point where they could safely do his second surgery.
Things over time got a little bit more concerning. We'd see that he looked a little more blue and pale, and So we went to clinic appointments and were evaluated to see what potentially was going on, and they looked at his heart with an ultrasound, did an echocardiogram. They evaluated his oxygen saturations in his blood, and they were pretty worried about him because his oxygen saturations in clinic were dropping into the 60s. His goal was to be in the 70s to decrease the heart failure symptoms. Well, unfortunately, these 60s continued to be an issue, and they wanted us to come back to Omaha.
Cardiologist Dr. Jansen, who we had met prenatally, got on the phone and, he said, "I'm really sorry, but we need to get Calum here." And I immediately started crying because I, just was imagining what our life was going to look like. It's just like amazingly helpless sensation and feeling as a parent that you are terrified and you may not get to see your baby again.
Hurricane Helene had just hit North Carolina, and one of the major IV fluid producers in the country's factory was completely decimated by the hurricane. And so no production was coming out of there. And so unfortunately, given the IV fluid shortage, his surgery was canceled. So at that point, we were nervous. October 16th, 2024, Calum underwent his surgery. He had a sternotomy. That's where they crack open his little chest. This is the second time that he's had that done. They subsequently repaired the holes in his heart and placed a patch, 2 different patches over the holes, and repaired his valves, which previously were one large valve. They made into what would, in essence, be 2 normal valves. And he had a band around his main pulmonary artery that he had placed in his first surgery to help decrease heart failure symptoms with the defect that they were fixing. They were able to remove that, and thank goodness everything went as good as it could go. So post-operatively, things went really, really well.
He got discharged from the hospital 9 days after his second open heart surgery, strong and recovered very beautifully, and has continued to do that even more so, and life has just become more normal. He is, up until recently, was just on a little bit of oxygen when he sleeps. He's actually been able to come off of that completely. He's doing all of his therapies with, physical therapy and learning to sit up on his own and crawl. He's pink. His lips are pink. His cheeks are pink. He gets pink when he has a fever. All the things that you maybe take for granted with your other kids.
As a physician working in the ICU, I've experienced a lot. I can say that I've seen a lot that many, many people will never experience. I've seen a lot of families suffering because of the illness that their family member had at that time. And to kind of be put on the other side of it, for me, is life-changing. To think that Dr. Subramanian, he had opened our son's chest twice. He saved his life with the initial surgery, and then for a second time comes back and does surgery on a heart that really is about the size of an acorn. To be able to do all that he did is life-changing. It changes your perspective. I've said this a lot of times when I talk to people about what he has given my son and my family. He was able to give him something that 30, 40 years ago, kids like him wouldn't be alive with anymore. He's given Calum the ability to live 50, 60, 70, 80 years, when without what he did, Calum likely wouldn't be here with us today. It changes you. It puts you on the other side. It gives me a different perspective as a physician. Like I said, I deal with people that have critical illness every day, and to be able to relate to them now, for me, has become more powerful. I think I connect better with people. I think that I'm able to make I don't want to say a bigger difference, but be able to be another shoulder, be another hand, helping hand, be somebody that they can that can relate to what they're going through. We're so grateful because kids like Calum get to benefit from the great advancements that have happened in the last 40 years in relation to congenital heart disease care that other kids at that time never had. Tonight, everybody here can be a hero. You can give and donate so that other kids can have what our family has been given, which we can't be grateful enough for.